Welcome to Lady Audaci-Tea. It's Alex, and unfortunately today it's just me because our girl Amanda is very sick. She just got home from Ireland and she has a nasty cold that's really wrecked her voice. So we're gonna let her rest and rest those vocal cords, and we cannot wait until she's back. So for now, for the first half, I'm going to be on my own, but on the second half, I'm going to have Hilary, better known as News by the Hill on Instagram, on, and we're going to talk a little bit about the health updates from the British royal family and all things the Denmark accession, and I'm so very excited for that. But to kick off the episode, we of course have to go in for our ritual of a banana article of the week. And since we took a little break from January, at first I was like, okay, cool. Like, we have a banana article, clear as day, not too much riffraff to go through. But then the news drop about Kate, Charles, and Fergie's health, and things got BANANAS bananas. Okay. And we'll get a little bit into those banana articles later on when we discuss that. But even with all of that, I'm sure you won't be surprised out of Queen Elizabeth giving permission to Harry and Meghan to name Lilibet after her or not, or Charles and Kate's health news and the Denmark accession, that the story about Lilibet and Queen Elizabeth II is what came out on top for the banana article of the week. On January 14th, it was dropped by the Daily Mail. I think it was Rebecca English in particular who had the exclusive for the Daily Mail, that supposedly Queen Elizabeth II was not happy with the naming of Lilibet after her, and she was very upset with Harry and Meghan for saying that they got permission. This all came from a book titled Charles III, New King, New Court, The Inside Story by Robert Hardman. And he pretty much gave permission to the Daily Mail to give exclusives about some portions of his book to drum up interest in it. And obviously, the portion that got the most interest was about Harry and Meghan. And what he had said through this exclusive that was dropped on January 14th was that the Queen Elizabeth II was not happy about the naming of Lilibet after her, pretty much claiming that a courtier told him that she had said something along the lines that, I don't own the land, I don't own my money, I only own my name. Rolling my eyes dramatically, if that is true. And on top of that, that she was upset that they said they got permission, when in her eyes, they did not ask permission. So this got a lot of reactions and it started a lot of conversations, some good, some bad. And out of that, articles came about that were truly shocking. And the one that got crowned our Bananas of the Week article comes from Piers Morgan's wife, Cecilia Walden, and it's titled, Meghan Hadn't Earned the Right to Call Her Daughter Lilibet. People calling you by a nickname they haven't earned the right to use should be stopped in their tracks. And yes, like Piers, she's obsessed with Meghan. She's racist, she's misogynistic, and everything else in between, which you can tell in this article alone, which is not her first article about Meghan. But in this article, it is centered around Meghan demonizing her and talking about how she's trash for doing this, even though it is very clear that Meghan and Harry made this decision together. There's in fact articles, I think from 2021, saying that Harry had always planned to name his daughter Lilibet if he had a daughter, and had told the Queen about that before he even met Meghan. She does have an explanation, though, about why she is centering this around Meghan. She writes, why does the implication suggest Meghan's involvement more than it does Harry? Because in my experience, mothers tend to have far more sway than fathers when it comes to choosing baby names. Certainly when it came to naming my own daughter, my husband's input largely extended to rejecting various early suggestions. A girl at school was called X and she had cankles. He'd once worked with an X and she was a nightmare, before eventually agreeing to my final choice. A reminder, her husband is Piers Morgan, so she's trying to compare the everyday man to the everyday incel. It just, no. She also uses a 2010 survey in Britain that said 4 in 10 British dads are forced to back down when naming their child to let the wife have their way. And she concludes that with, I think we can all agree, Lilibet has Meghan stamped all over it. It truly does not. It truly does not. It has Harry stamped all over it. But obviously we have to be dumb. We need to dumb ourselves down for this article. So she goes on to talk a little bit more about why she's just so furious about this. There's a type of woman who calls you by a nickname too soon. You're not there yet. You may even barely know each other. You might be a friend of a friend or a neighbor you've crossed in the street once or twice, and then boom, out it comes. So, Seals, how was your Christmas? Because if the familiarity is not enough to set your teeth on edge, it's often a nickname nobody has ever used before, one that will hopefully never be used again. The intention is obvious: to speed up your blossoming relationship into something fully fledged, to con you into believing that you two are already intimate. If anyone else is present, they're to be conned into believing the same. Off the bat, Megan isn't a friend of a friend or a neighbor. She was the queen's granddaughter in law. So there's just apples and oranges here. And then the use of con is so purposeful. It is making sure that Megan's actions aren't only sinister, but they're the equivalent of being criminal, which I just found really grimy because throughout time since Megan has become on the scene, it's all about making sure everything she does should be doubted as being genuine. It should be seen as devious. It should be seen as having a double meaning to it, and that double meaning is something sinister. To leave us off with a laugh about all of this, I must read this burn book submission. I'm sure this is she just ripped this straight from her diary. She says, "Again, we will never know the full truth, but next time you're backed into a corner by someone aggressively calling you by a nickname they haven't earned the right to use, remember the agenda and call them out on it." Like, with zero context, you would think she was talking about something important, like, I don't know, racism, misogyny, things like that. But she's talking about a nickname. But she's using aggressive wording that makes it sound like she's standing up for something big, that she's giving you a lesson in standing up for yourself. When at the end of the day, this is about a nickname and it's about the name of a 2-year-old girl, which is just really sick about all this. It's not just the Harry and Meghan aspect of it all, but that they're using a 2-year-old child to run this story. And this gets a lot more sinister when you look at the timing of certain British outlets raising hell over Lilibet's name. Because this all is coming around, well, January 14th. So that is 13, or no, about 10 days after the court records for Epstein were released. And those were released on January 4th. And in those records, names were unsealed. There were associates, friends, and victims of Ghislaine Maxwell, along with Jeffrey Epstein. Andrew's name was mentioned in these court records 67 times. He was also named by 2 other victims who were underage at the time, who claimed they were forced to be sexually assaulted by Andrew. I will not call it sex because sex is between 2 consensual people. So on that note, I will put a trigger warning. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty details. I'm just going to talk about the summary of it. And one of the victims did talk about the numerous times that she was forced to be in the presence of Andrew. And they call her Jane Doe 3 in it, and I will be reading what she says. Jane Doe number 3 was forced to have sexual relations with the prince when she was a minor in 3 separate geographical locations: in London, at Ghislaine Maxwell's apartment in New York, and on Epstein's private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and an orgy with numerous other underage girls. Epstein instructed Jane Doe number 3 that she was to give the prince whatever he demanded, and required Jane Doe number 3 to report back to him on the details of the sexual abuse. Maxwell facilitated Prince Andrew's acts of sexual abuse by acting as a madame for Epstein, thereby assisting in internationally trafficking Jane Doe number 3 and numerous other young girls for sexual purposes. So Andrew wasn't just named, but he was named in the aspect that he participated in the sex trafficking of underage girls. So this all comes out on January 4th, and it's originally reported that the royal family is ready to kick him out. This was January 4th by Sam Greenhill and Rebecca English. It's titled, "Prince Andrew will never return to the royal fold and will be forced out of the royal lodge after documents relating to pedophile Jeffrey Epstein detailing sexual assault allegations crystallized King Charles' determination to act." It reads, a source says, "When it comes to any public role for his brother, there is no way back. There has always been an agreement that Andrew would be permitted to attend private and family events, as is his right, but not public or official ones. That has not changed. Andrew has refused requests by Charles to move into smaller Frogmore Cottage, which had belonged to Harry and Meghan before they left for the US. It is now understood the king will redouble his efforts to move his brother in the coming months." A source said, "When it comes to family, it is difficult, but this association is just never going to go away, and that means he, Andrew, has to." Right off the bat, too, let's not forget that he participated in the coronation, the Queen's funeral. He was just at the Christmas walk in Sandringham. I butchered that one, and Amanda is not here to correct me. I'm sorry, y'all. But that happened on December 25th. So saying that he's only allowed in these like private roles when he has been in very public official roles during public official engagements is just a straight up lie. So that does not happen though. Them supposedly going, or Charles supposedly going to put a foot down and change things up and make him downsize his home that he supposedly cannot afford because it needs quite a bit of upkeep. So they not only backtrack on this story, but bury it by using a 2-year-old girl's name and a dead woman's supposed feelings about it. So on January 14th at 5:33, Rebecca English tweets the Daily Mail's front cover for the following day, January 15th. And it reads, Queen's fury over naming a baby Lilibet. Aide says Marnock was as angry as I'd ever seen her after Sussex claimed they had their blessing to use childhood nickname. And this is an exclusive by Rebecca English. She then tweets at 5:58 how the royals have dealt with a torrent of allegations from Harry and Meghan. Queen was as angry as I've ever seen her after Sussex's claim they had the monarch's blessing to use the name Lilibet. Aide tells Robert Hardman. At 5:59, she tweets a second Daily Mail exclusive written by Robert Hardman, who released the book claiming Queen Elizabeth was furious about the naming of Lilibet. This tweet at 5:59 reads, Prince Andrew could be far more damaging outside the loop, were he to be cast out of the royal fold. In terms of tweets and word count, far more focus is put on the story about Lilibet than the story about Andrew. And it's very clear from how these stories are presented and when they were posted about that this story was supposed to be buried under the Lilibet story. And the exclusive pretty much just tells us of why this family is still happily rooted in the bygone age. It reads, "The king will not just cast his brother adrift. He is very fond of his nieces, and at least Andrew hasn't been disloyal," says one source. But any return to public life is out of the question. His legal problems are not resolved. The public don't want him, and many people still remember his rudeness last time around. And Andrew and his behavior in the workplace, outside of being a supposed child molester, is a completely different conversation. But being rude, there's money laundering, there's just being friends with shady ass people. There's all sorts of stuff. But hey, he hasn't spoke badly about about the family, so it's completely okay to keep him in the fold. Am I right? They go on to say, royal insiders highlight two other considerations. First, Prince Andrew remains penitent and eager to please, though he might not remain so were he to be cast out of the royal fold. As one source points out, Andrew could be far more damaging outside the loop. Second, there are those who fear for his mental well being. One official who had known him for many years was astonished by the transformation in him when they met again, describing him as almost incoherent. Whether he remains in residence at the Queen Mother's spacious former home, Royal Lodge, is another matter. There will be no eviction order from the king, contrary to reports that he wanted to give Royal Lodge to Prince William, who in any case was not looking for another house move. It is more of a question of cost. Royal Lodge sits outside the main Windsor security cordon and requires separate protection. The king's position, according to one source, is quite simple. His brother can either foot the annual security bill of around £1 million himself, or move inside the Windsor cordon where Prince Harry's old home, Frogmore Cottage, is available. I'm also laughing about, many things about all of this. First off, that we care about this man's mental health and they're using that as a way to, I don't know, make people feel bad for him, which I just find sickening. But then also that part where they say, contrary to reports about William wanting a second home, when it was literally the Daily Mail who reported that he wanted that Royal Lodge and has reported that more than one time. So it sounds like their sources are now actually backtracking on what they originally said. And then the key to all of this, which isn't a laughing matter, is that he's more dangerous outside the fold, which just makes me think, what does this man have on these people? And again, how scary it is that as long as you're quiet and you're loyal and that you're willing to please, that it's completely acceptable that you've done heinous things to other people, as long as you don't speak out against the family. Like, again, it's a cult, it's a mafia. But promise you guys not to get too much on the hiccup of how disgusting Andrew is, but I will end that segment with just really running home about how gross this all is, that they are willing to use a child to cover up the fact that they're not going to do anything about a man who's been named 67 times in court records and who has been named by three different girls who at one point were children that were being supposedly sexually assaulted by him. Anyways, that was not all that was happening in royal news, because on January 17th, we got two major health updates from about two major royals. First came one via Instagram from the official Prince and Princess of Wales Instagram. A statement that was posted and reads, Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales, was admitted to hospital yesterday for planned abdominal surgery. The surgery was successful, and it is expected that she will remain in hospital for 10 to 14 days before returning home to continue her recovery. Based on the current medical advice, she is unlikely to return to public duties until after Easter. The Princess of Wales appreciates the interest this statement will generate. She hopes that the public will understand her desire to maintain as much normalcy for her children as possible and her wish that her personal medical information remains private. Kensington Palace will therefore only provide updates on Her Royal Highness's progress when there's significant new information to share. The Princess of Wales wishes to apologize to all those concerned for the fact that she has to postpone her upcoming engagements. She looks forward to reinstating as many as possible as soon as possible. An hour or so later, Buckingham Palace released a statement to the media that reads, In common with thousands of men each year, the king has sought treatment for an enlarged prostate. His Majesty's condition is benign, and he will attend hospital next week for a corrective procedure. The king's public engagements will be postponed for a short period of recuperation. So, wowzers, immediately out the bat, because the British royal family's biggest players are out of the game for a little bit. I mean, Kate is their it girl. She is the star power. And then obviously you have the king. But about this, what's really noticeable is the vastly different statements we got. Because first off, Kensington Palace statement was released through social media and it's way longer. And I must say, I was just it feels like there's a certain sections of that can be completely taken out, like keep the first paragraph and everything else could kind of go, maybe with an extra sentence saying to respect her privacy, because even mentioning that she had to cancel upcoming engagements makes it almost in contradictory to the fact that this was all planned. Because if it was planned, then why are you having to cancel engagements? Because it feels like if it was planned, you wouldn't have set up engagements while you were still in recovery. But we're not going to speculate on what is wrong with her because this is her health. And I just think is tiptoeing along the lines of invasion of privacy and parasocial relationships and not going too far with that. But I do think that part of that section of the statement just didn't help out in people speculating and wanting to know what's going on, if this was planned, if it was not planned, and what portion was planned. And I also think, there's a big question too if why Charles said more and revealed this and Kate didn't. And I do think there is something to the fact that the Charles is a monarch, he is king, so his health in the hierarchy and in the importance of the job is something he can't be as private about, because it will affect Britain if, say, he was very, very sick and there was a chance of death at all. And prayers there is not, and everything, of course, goes well. And since this was announced, there's been quite the reaction from the British press. And I mean, bananas, you guys. Like, I mean, I think in some way we expected it. I think, though, it's very interesting how far it went. I think, especially in the attempt to get clicks. We had one from January 18th by Liz Jones. This feels personal. The news Kate is in hospital has hit me like a young member of my family has been struck down. Then you have Alana Kozla on January 17th. Prince William set to juggle childcare and caring for Kate Middleton following her planned abdominal surgery. Then you have Rebecca English that same day. Kate's rock rushes to her side. Rebecca English's deeply personal portrait of Prince William and why she knows he'll bend heaven and earth to support his wife. Then we had a front cover that read, Let's pray that they're both okay. And it's a photo of Charles and Kate. In response to this, people started to make fun of these headlines pretty much. I mean, there was immediate conversation about the treatment of care that Kate was getting because she's a rich woman and because she's a royal compared to your everyday people who have to wait weeks to get a surgery by NHS and are usually kicked out within 24 hours of the hospital. And these are important conversations to have. And none of them were saying that Kate is a bad person because she gets great medical care. They're just pointing out the difference in treatment when you're from a different tax bracket and how that is unfair. But what really started, I think, the trolling is not trolling William and Kate, but trolling these articles, especially the ones about William and supposedly juggling childcare, because it ignores the fact that he has an entire staff of people to help him. And I think it also just doesn't help too, because it makes it seems like he was only a part-time father, and now that his wife is sick and in bed, then all of a sudden he's going to be a full-time father. It's like you shouldn't be given credit for that. You should just be always doing that. And it's hard when 99% of the world are just regular folks, and a good portion of the world doesn't have even a nanny, maybe a babysitter a couple times a week. So it's just like there's not a lot of sympathy there. And personally, I think this is also to try to drive home how William and Kate are supposedly doing parenting different than everyone before, when that just simply is not true. I've seen some people suggest that William is somehow doing groundbreaking things with his parenting, and again, it's just not true. Other than taking maternity leave when Kate had George, taking time for himself and to be with the family, he hasn't done anything that's unique or been done for the first time. A lot of the things that we see William and Kate do with their children's is playbooks that Diana or Princess Anne created. Diana and Charles were the first ones to take a royal baby on a tour with him, which was with William. We know Diana was very hands-on with the children. There was often complaints that she would have them with her during meetings with her staff to be planning engagements and her projects. She took them out. She took them to water parks. She took them out to McDonald's. Like, she was that hands-on mom. And the queen mother, who a lot of times they are trying to say Kate Middleton is pretty much the reincarnation of, was known to be hands-on with her daughters, and they moved as a unit together later on in life. So I think it's interesting that we're rewriting history to make it seem like they're doing things never been done before, and also that it's completely acceptable to talk about what a shit father Charles was. Like, I would love to be a fly on the wall when they have to come together after someone just briefed about how Charles was a horrible father and William didn't like him very much. Because it's just got to be a little bit awkward, just a little bit, right? So there's a lot of responses to these articles, and a lot of them again were making fun of them. And one thing too, to also go along with this, with like the Rebecca English article about him being her rock, she has a photo to go along with this photo, to go along with this article. And it's a photo of William who's looking kind of sad. It's him driving, and it was him driving, leaving the hospital. And I know that people, when they mentioned that this was done on purpose, that we saw these photos of him on purpose, were very just like, how could you say William and Kate, or especially William, would want to set himself up to be seen, that he's doing the royal version of a celebrity pop walk. And I keep reinstating to people is that you have to give the press a little bit, so they will most likely protect Kate's privacy and not invade it instead. Because this hospital, actually, Prince Philip had been to, and I think it was in 2013, and I think he also went to this hospital again in 2021. In 2013, there are no photos of him entering. The only photos we got were days later, after it was announced that he had his surgery and everything was going well. We got photos of the family visiting him through the front door, and we got photos of him leaving dressed in a suit, walking by himself, which ran with the headlines about how happy and healthy he was. And then in 2021, he went again, and we didn't get any photos of him going in. We didn't get any photos of family visiting other than Charles, but it was reported other family members went to visit him, but there was no photos of that. And then there's one blurry photo of him leaving. And what I think is interesting about that, it shows though that there's a way to get in and out of these hospitals without being seen. I mean, Kate alone went to this hospital without being seen. William, during this pap walk he did later on, enter the hospital through his car, and obviously through the entrance without being seen, but only when he left. And these are little tidbits. It's kind of like they can't control every little things, but a lot of times when we see the royals, it's because they want to be seen. But one last thing too about that, in terms of what William and Kate do, how it's talked about what they do when it comes to the parenting. One thing that Diana and Anne did with their parenting, they were very hands-on parents, and they, at least Anne, I'm forgetting her ex-husband's name, but he is known to be hands-on with the kids. He's very close to his children that they had together, Zara and Philip, not Philip. I'm forgetting that other man's name too. I just think of him as the dude who made the milk commercial. Honestly, he just means nothing else to me other than that. But they were hands on, but all of these people still worked. Diana worked. There's actually a 2016 article in the Daily Mail that compares the work rates of William and Kate versus Charles and Diana when they had children. And Diana, unlike Charles, we know was a very hands-on parent, of course, with the help that she had too, but she was still beating them engagements by like 60 plus engagements more than they are doing with children too. So I just think to take that in mind is something that is always now left out of this conversation around William and Kate and parenting, as that there is an example of someone who was able to parent and be there for her children but also still worked. So, in terms of what we're seeing with the Royals handling the media around these big health announcements, I am so excited to have Hilary on, better known as News by Hill on Instagram, to bring us all just to pick her brain about what we're seeing from this to the Denmark Accession. So excited. Hi, Hilary.
Hello, how are you? Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course, we've been chatting a little bit on in the DMs about this, but I'm so excited to have you here to talk more about it, because I think one of the big things, and I know I personally got quite a bit of slack in my DMs for mentioning that possibly Kate, William have all of these big dogs on their team, and their entire point is to help them set a narrative that even around a big health announcement, there's an important need to feed the media tidbits, little leaks, updates, a couple photographs to go with the headline, so they will hopefully give them space. And I know something I got a lot of heat for when I was talking about the shots of William coming out of the hospital. And like I kind of put it bluntly, he chose to drive past a wall of paparazzi. We didn't get any photos of him going in. We didn't even get any photos of him going inside the building, let alone walking out of the car and going inside of the building. So I just wanted to kind of pick your brain about that type of stuff, especially as a journalist who sees a lot of the stuff going on behind the scenes. Do you think William is a victim of the paparazzi in this situation, or he's feeding the paparazzi something? So I don't know, just maybe they'll respect Kate's privacy?
Well, I wouldn't say the word victim. I would say, very much somebody who knows this game, who's been born and raised in this, and his wife has been in this for a long time also, the Princess of Wales, and they know and they understand that there will be media interest. And I don't think in a cynical way. I would say, naturally when you hear a surprise announcement like what was announced last Wednesday, that is going to pique the interest of a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people in Britain, and it made international headlines, but I think particularly in the UK. And to me, that photograph that we saw, they knew that was going to happen, and I don't necessarily blame them for orchestrating that, because as you say, this is about somebody's health. They're entitled to their privacy, but they also appreciate and understand that
Mm-hmm.
public interest. And so you have to weigh up in those moments, what is public interest and in the
Ooh,
interest of the
yeah.
public.
Mm-hmm.
So, give that photo, and it stops maybe that need to get more information and more updates, even though some of that interest is with the best of intent. It's not our business
Exactly.
to
It's
know
not
any
our
further.
business. That's why, I know here we are not going to be doing any speculating about what's going on with Kate, because when someone says respect my privacy around my health, respect their privacy around their health. And I think, especially too, as a woman and someone who is as powerful as Kate is, and I think so much of her public image has to be quote unquote perfect. I can't imagine how scary it has to be that maybe the world knows something's going on with you and you don't not going to appear perfect because of that. And I also know too something I've seen brought up, because I thought their statement was very interesting, and personally I thought it unfortunately kind of fed in with people maybe having more interest in what was going on, because it gave you little, but it gave you there's so much it didn't give. It just kind of naturally people were like, well, what is it? But I think what was really smart so far of what we've seen, because in contrast to say Charles' announcement, which did give details about what he was going through and what procedure he would be getting, which is why I think maybe we're seeing them leak a little bit more. Like there was something on the Sunday Times by Nika a couple days ago talking about how they're doing with the hospital visit, a couple other random topics in there. And, and Kate has had troubles in the past keeping the paparazzi and the media off of her back when she's been in the hospital. I know the first pregnancy with George, it was announced because people were all over her and wondering where she was.
Well, I think also too when you look at the leaks maybe that have come out this week, I think it was very important for them, and I think the right move that very soon after that official statement came out, a lot of media reported, citing sources,
Yes.
that this was non-cancerous because that would have been the natural next question for the public. So I think, to be fair, I think a lot of the public feel okay. We don't need to know exactly what it is, but if you could just tell us that it's not something. And so I think that was kind of a wise move on their part. But also, as you referenced there, I'm sure that their view on this and their approach to this is in many ways influenced by past experiences that they had. And one of those experiences was really honestly such a sad and tragic story. And it goes back to late 2012. It was announced that, she was then the Duchess of Cambridge, newly married. She was hospitalized with
Mhm.
acute morning sickness. Now, at this point, it wasn't even announced that she was pregnant. And so you can imagine the amount of headlines and interest and debate that that
Mhm.
generated. Off the back of that news, while she was in hospital, she was in King Edward VII Hospital in central London. And a Sydney based radio station, I believe it was called Sydney's Today FM, they did what was intended to be an innocent prank call, never thinking that they would get through to the hospital, made a phone call pretending to be the Queen and Prince Charles, phoning the hospital to check in on their family member. Now, very, very sadly, a nurse took the call and transferred it on to another nurse, believing that it was, in fact, the Queen. And you can only imagine how viral that went. Sadly, 3 days after that call, that nurse died by
Yeah.
suicide. And so, this, what you're seeing today, and I mean, just such a devastating case, it's such a devastating thing to happen to somebody who, it was
Yes.
an innocent mistake, and and so I think their approach, the approach that the palace will take and the royal family will take, will be in understanding the media interest, but also for their safety and privacy, but for the safety and
Yes.
privacy of other people as well. And also remember, it's not as if a hospital in central London has just been shut down for the Princess of Wales. There are a lot of other patients going in and out, and it's a trying time for
Mhm.
anybody in hospital. So it's just a case of, I suppose, how
Yes,
do you manage that?
exactly. Yes, and I think we all know that if the media wasn't fed something, that they would find something, and it most likely would be invading Kate's privacy to do so, like we've seen in the past. So that's why I keep saying it's smart. They're doing this, I'm sure, to protect Kate and to protect others, like you said. And there's been an interesting back and forth too, like I said, about the announcements. And I just wanted to kind of pick your brain about that, of maybe why you thought we got two announcements in one day, because they were hours apart. Kate and Charles' announcement, even though very different announcements. I was truly shocked that we got them on the same day. Were you surprised by that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was really surprised in many respects, but I think just the news
Yes.
itself was surprising that there would be two such substantial, health updates within what is such a small working royal family these days. And then to think that by this weekend there was a third update
Hmm.
within 4 days about Sarah, the Duchess of York, being diagnosed with skin cancer only 6 months after being diagnosed with breast cancer. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, we know that it was this day last week that the Princess of Wales had her operation. And so of course, they're going to wait a day and make sure they put out that announcement first that she's had the
Yes.
surgery and it has gone well. And I suppose maybe at that point, it was a case of, we know that King Charles is going to get this procedure next week. We're talking about royals and health
Yes.
today. Let's put this out as well. And I think it maybe softened divided the
Yes.
attention on both and the conversation on both.
Yes.
And so I think it was not shocking statements, but it was surprising statements to receive. But I do understand the idea of doing both. If anything, I was thinking the other day when we learned over the weekend about Sarah, the Duchess of York, and her health update and her skin cancer diagnosis, it made me look back at the coverage or the attendance on Christmas Day in
Oh,
Sandringham
yes.
differently. You think about it differently because actually at the time it was a
Huge.
huge surprise to see her there. It was the first time in 32 years that she did that walk to mass with the royal family. And I look at it now and I think, I mean, she said this week she's taken some time to to be with her family and everything. So she has most likely known about this diagnosis since
Yes.
before Christmas. And so it just makes you look at that differently. And I suppose the sensitive approach that the palace must have had to take on how they, announce all this, keep the public informed, but, maintain the respect and privacy of people that are going through health issues. Like, I mean, it doesn't matter if you're royal or what you are, you go
It's
through a health issue,
scary.
and
Yeah, very
that's
scary. I
yeah.
yeah, I don't know why, but part of me is still shocked. I think especially about Kate. I think it just kind of says, like, even though I know a lot of this is just her public image, but to see a woman who's always presented to us so perfectly plucked and glowy and shiny and beautiful is sitting sick in a hospital bed. It really is still kind of jarring to me. And obviously a speedy recovery to all of the royals, all of them. But on something much happier news, we had the Denmark Accession, which was very exciting. That was on January 14th. And I think the biggest thing that stood out, and I got a lot of comments and questions about, was why they did that instead of a coronation. And a lot of people assuming that they did an accession and instead of a coronation because they're reading the room of the modern times. But I was looking it up and they haven't had a coronation since 1840.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually the Danish Royals have received a lot of credit in the last few weeks, and this is just a continuation on how it has been and how it has been
Mm-hmm.
for 170 years. I'm not good at math. I'm good at royals. I'm not good at math. What's really interesting to me about the Danish royalty is the fact that on the one hand, they are one of the oldest royal families in the world, certainly in Europe. And on the other hand, they have
Yes.
this modern feel to them now and this modern touch, right? And basically, as you say, yes, there's been a monarchy in Denmark for 1,000 years, but it wasn't until 1849 that it became a
Oh, wow.
constitutional monarchy. Now, I think the first coronation, it definitely did have
Yes.
coronations, by the way. It had coronations like the coronations we know and we saw last May. But I think, to my understanding, the first was in like
Oh my God.
1170 or something like that. And then basically in the 1600s, Denmark became a hereditary monarchy. So that brought a bit of change. And then the idea of a coronation and the accession to the throne changed again when in 1849 it
That
became a
makes sense.
constitutional monarchy. And that was the point where it basically abolished the anointing practice. And it kind of became what we saw basically on the 14th of January, a pretty
And
straightforward handover.
anointing, that is the, like, by God, like God gave you this. Okay. And I think that's really important too, because again, the contrast of the coronation and just that belief that God gave you like the supreme blood, pretty much, you and your family, and that's why you roll, is such an outdated concept, especially now in 2024. So even if they didn't change the roles, then I think it says a lot about the Denmark family and their lasting power and why they're so popular among the country. They have like an 85% approval rating right now, which is
Mm.
huge.
Oh my God, they're so popular. And that's a consistent rating, by the way. That's not just because of, recent
Wow.
headlines and the fact that they're in the headlines a lot and generating a lot of international media coverage on the country. They are consistently
It seems like,
very,
so
very
reading the
popular.
room has been going on since the 1800s. They realize, okay, yes, exactly. Because,
I don't know about you, but I felt actually very watching the scenes on the 14th of January, there was something about it. Don't get me wrong, there's
yes.
tradition there, it's a monarchy at the end of the day, but there was also this feel of it being a family oriented day. And that was something that I think a lot of people felt was lacking last May. That really, to be honest, I felt that we were watching a family moment as much as I felt a transition from one sovereign
Like
to
when
another,
King
basically.
Frederick is like tearing up while his mom is signing off, like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
it's just, it's everything you want. Because yes, that
And the
photo, and
photo
then he says that he was, oh my
where
gosh,
she's
and
walking
he's just,
out of the
oh
room.
my god, he's like looking up, just kind of scared, excited, but scared and sad. And there's this one point that I saw a couple journalists quoted him as saying, like, "Are you sure, Ma?" After she had stood up and signed and stuff like that, like, because I think that's what we want to believe, even if we don't know what's really going on behind the scenes. That a lot of these families are like, yes, there's duty, yes, this is work, but this is a family at the end of the day, and that's what it was giving throughout the process. I mean, again, King Frederick throughout was wiping tears away, and I thought that was very beautiful, like throughout to see that because it just felt personal. It felt less out of touch, you know, than the gold and the tiaras that have just, blood on them. And it's just, yeah, whether this was happening in 1800s or not, it was a very good call. And I can't help but think sometimes the Denmark and many other European royal families look at the British royal family and the issues they have. And it's just kind of like, catch up, guys. Like, you got to catch up. You got to read the room a little bit because I'm sure that didn't cost 10 million pounds either, which is another big thing, which I feel like what comes down to when it comes to the British coronation was the money. You saw something swift, you saw something that was still work, but was still personal. I mean, seeing Mary and King Frederick come out and the kiss and everything like that, which I thought was beautiful. And I would and a little sidebar here, which I find really interesting because I saw a couple of people kind of criticize that kiss because they still have in their mind those reports that happen in what was that, December, about now late November.
November, late
Now
November,
King
I think.
Frederick was
Yeah.
seen with a Mexican actress in Spain. It just, the photos don't look good because he was said to be spending time with her late at night, returned to her home where she lives alone, didn't leave until the next morning. But from what I've heard, that didn't get a lot of traction in Denmark. Like, it made more international news than it did in Denmark alone, which I think again says a lot about their popularity maybe in Denmark and King Frederick's popularity, that they won't even entertain that type of stuff.
I think it said a lot about Queen Mary's popularity too. A sense of protection, because actually, even though King Frederick is incredibly popular in Denmark, don't get me wrong, of course he is, Queen Mary is, of the two,
We
the
heard
most
that cheer when
popular.
she came
And
out.
I can't, yeah, I mean, I can't speak to what the sentiment was like in Denmark, but I know that basically it coincided. So these photographs were taken in Spain, and it coincided, the release of these photographs and these articles in tabloid media in Spain coincided with a royal visit that the Spanish royals did to Denmark. And so it must have been, no matter what, I mean, the Danish royals haven't publicly commented on this, but the woman in the photographs with who was then Crown Prince Frederick did comment and was very, very clear that she
Mm-hmm.
flatly denied the statements and the suggestion of a romantic relationship. She was in contact with her lawyers. But that must have been a very, very
Yes.
difficult week regardless, right? And the idea that you have to be so public for this scheduled visit with the
Oh,
Spanish royals,
God.
I'm sure that was
Yeah.
a tough week. This May it'll mark 20 years before their wedding, and I think they're a very, very popular couple. And so maybe it was an idea that people just didn't want to give this
Mm-hmm. Because
any any
yeah,
kind of
I don't know a lot
thought. I don't
about
know.
how the relationship is between the royals and Denmark media. Like, I'm not sure, but it does in ways kind of remind me of what happened with William when those rumors were going about with Rose, or even in 2016 when that video and those photos came out of him partying on that ski trip. And this is the Daily Mail quote, not me, but they said that a woman slut dropped on him. Okay, that a lot of the British media didn't really talk about it. It was like a one and done story, but international media has continued it on. So it does make me wonder sometimes if there's just a little bit of them being able to tell the Denmark media, we're not going to go there with it. And again, maybe there's just no real interest in hearing that story because Queen Mary and King Frederick are so popular and they're so popular together, kind of like how William and Kate are so popular together.
I think the thing that piqued my interest the most was, what I'd love to know is, did it play a
Mm-hmm.
role, if any, in the decision to abdicate, which seems to have
Very
come
real
as a real
surprise because
surprise.
yes, it was in 2016 that Queen Margaret, she said, it's always been you stay as long as you live. That's what my father did and my predecessors, and the way I see it too. So that was 2016, and here we are in 2024, and she opened up the year announcing that she would be stepping down. And yes, I would love to know your thoughts about that. The why do you think so? Because I know there's been some health issues with her. Maybe she's just like, I'm tired and I deserve this, which she does.
Yeah, well, I mean, she's 83 years old. She's been very, very clear about the health issues she's battled. She had surgery last year and has long had issues
Mhm.
with her back. Um, But at the same time, it was a surprise announcement because it wasn't, you know, she's been quoted many times, not just in 2016, talking about how this
Yeah.
was a title for life, and praised other monarchs for their approach to that, including Queen Elizabeth II in the past. We don't know what the exact reason was, but I do find it interesting, the idea of how she was able to do it. It felt again like quite a full circle moment to abdicate on the
Yes,
anniversary
it
of your
was so
accession.
beautifully done.
It just felt, it
Hmm.
felt clean and like a happy occasion. And you know, often, you know, more often than not, and is the norm that a lot of people are used to, is the idea of a coronation coming
Exactly.
off the back of a
Yes.
death,
Yes. And I think so
you
soon
know.
after, Queen Elizabeth passing away and then the coronation with Britain,
Mhm.
there you can just really feel the difference in the vibes that happening and the importance, I think, of having that support and having the former monarch be there to support you, to be seen with you, cheering you on and happy for you. And like you said, without a death, without mourning. So it's like everyone can be excited and everyone can celebrate. And they did celebrate. I think they had a crowd of about 300,000 people. 300,000 people showed up to just see them at the balcony for probably 15 minutes total. And I think they said over 2 million
Mm,
people watched, like half of the population watched Accession too. Which again says a lot about the interest and the
yeah.
popularity. And I do think maybe how smart it was because Margaret is a very popular figure too. I mean, every time I see a picture of her smoking a cigarette, I don't smoke cigarettes, but it genuinely brings me joy because there's just something so human about it. Seeing a monarch be human and have faults, like that. Just
I swear, I separate the two. I'm like Queen Margrethe of Denmark, Daisy
like
and her cigarettes.
Daisy and her cigarettes painting or sewing something for the costumes.
Yeah,
Yes,
we are off
exactly.
today.
She's like, I'm gonna go smoke my cigarettes and go paint in the sun. Leave me alone. And good for her. Like genuinely good for her. So happy for her.
Yeah.
And and there's actually, I remember reading that Queen Margaret was actually good friends with Queen Elizabeth II too. And I know there's quite a bit of relations, right, between the Denmark and the British royal family and overall all the European families. Because I remember they made a video, I think, for Daisy's 80th birthday. It was like Norway, Spain, Sweden were like calling her like Grandma Daisy or something like that. And it was very sweet. No British royals, of course.
They were friends and relatives. You
Oh
know, I mean,
wow.
they're third cousins, distantly related. But they seem to have had a lot of affection for each other. A lot of that is evident based on actually interviews that Queen Margrethe did, because as we know, the late Queen Elizabeth II didn't kind of do those
Yes.
informal interviews in the same way, but it certainly seems to have had a huge amount of affection for one another, a massive amount of respect. I think I'm pretty sure, confident they refer to each other quite affectionately
Oh.
as Daisy and Lilibet. And I think what was interesting is that what probably bonded them, right, is the idea that neither of them were born ever believing that they would one day
Oh,
be
I didn't know
queen.
that about
You
Daisy.
know, I think when you think back about the abdication in the UK in 1936, that really changed the trajectory of
Mm-hmm.
the royal family. You know, when Princess Elizabeth was born in 1926, she would never, like,
Never.
her parents would have never expected that she would be a queen one day. You know, first of all, her uncle was going to be the king. Second of
Yep.
all, she was a woman. You know, and the same, well, not the exact same, but similar in Denmark. So Queen Margrethe, Princess Margrethe, was actually, it wasn't until she was 13 that a law was changed in Denmark following a referendum, and that was basically what allowed a woman to
Wow.
become queen. And even though there was that was brought into law, it still gave precedence to male descendants. And if Queen Margrethe, who has two sisters, had had a brother, she still would not have become monarch. So I'm sure that was a bond, and I'm sure there were
Mm-hmm.
conversations that they would have had together, saying, you know, our parents, when we were born, this is not the future they would have thought
Mm-hmm.
for us. And look, they ended up being two of the
Yeah, like,
longest serving um,
pretty
queens in
badass. I
Europe.
don't know. It's like, look at us. Look at us.
I actually think about both of them too, and I think that they are, in many respects, a window into um, what we learn about when we learn about the history of royal families, particularly in Europe. And I think um, a lot of times, you know, the connections to different European royal families is made through Queen Victoria, and she's referenced a lot of times as the grandmother of Europe. But I actually maintain that King Christian the Ninth is the first person to talk
Oh,
about when we want to talk about connections to European royalty. King Christian the Ninth, he reigned from, don't quote me on this, but 1863, I think, to 1906. I'm going to double check that, but I'm nearly sure. And he was a great great grandfather to both Queen Margaretha
wow.
and
Okay.
Queen Elizabeth. Him and his wife, Queen Louise, had 6 children. 4 of them
Oh,
ascended
wow.
European thrones. So, yeah, and those connections still
So,
last to this day. I can
yeah,
I can go there if you
please,
want.
because I was
I
to say,
love
is
this,
that
but
like looking at very smart political marriages, pretty much?
it was all strategic.
This is the prince, and he's going to be king of this land. So this is who you're going to marry, or she would.
100%. So, for example, his daughter, Princess Alexandra, married King Edward VII of uh, Britain. So would have been Queen
Oh, wow.
Elizabeth's great grandmother. Another daughter, Princess Dagmar, married the Tsar Alexander of Russia. Prince Frederick became the Danish king, but another son, Wilhelm, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, um, he actually became King George the First of Greece, despite having
Oh my
no
god.
connection to the country at the time. Basically, in the 1860s, there was a coup that overthrew another monarchy, and he came in as King George the First of Greece. And that's where you see, you know, you might see those references to Prince Philip, who was, when he was born, Prince Philip Greece
Okay.
of Greece and
Oh,
Denmark.
okay. Wow. So they were very successful at their jobs, pretty much. Very.
They were, and King Christian's grandson became the king of Norway.
Wow.
So the we
So he is the
there's a web
grandfather.
there.
Yeah, like this man is the one who really started it all. And I think,
Mm.
sorry, coming back a little bit more to like Margaret and Queen Elizabeth II's relationship, because I think it was really interesting what you said too about how Margaret did interview. She did informal interviews, and that's not something we ever saw for Queen Elizabeth II. Very rarely. And we've had a lot of
Hmm.
articles too. Well, not lately, but in the run up to the accession, a lot of articles comparing Mary and Kate, pretty much saying like independent women, beautiful. They look just alike, even though I totally disagree with that. They're both just like brunettes. um, like, no, they don't look alike, but okay. And talking a lot about their work. And what I find really interesting is in those comparisons that Kate couldn't do the work that Mary does because I don't think the British population would have the same response that the Denmark population has. Because Denmark's far, I would say, more liberal than Britain is. Because I can't imagine Kate being able to say, even speak out about domestic violence against women, about feminism, about LGBTQ plus issues, or about racism and get the same response that Mary would get because, well, Kate doesn't talk about those things.
Well, I think a lot of it is, well, I don't know which comes first, right? But if you look at, we talked about the popularity of the Danish Royals in Denmark, and they're always consistently around the 80% mark and above. The popularity in the UK is
Yes.
generally a lot less. I think around the 60% if you were to look at the
Mhm.
family in general and the idea of the
Yeah, that's what the
royalty
last
and the
polling
monarchy.
was.
But there's a lot of fierce debate that, yeah, there's a lot of fierce debate that goes on um, in the UK about the monarchy, but not just the monarchy itself. I think in the last few years, there's been a huge debate in the UK about the legacy and history of the British Empire, and you know they're intrinsically
Yes.
linked to many people. They're so deeply intertwined in many respects that it's just a delicate balance. And I think there's that motto of never complain, never explain, really speaks to that idea of it being such
Mhm.
a fine line. And so I'm sure there's a lot of caution. I would imagine that there's a lot of,
Mhm.
not a lot of, because there aren't a lot of them, but I would imagine that there are, of the British Royals, many topics they feel very passionately about, but have a nervousness about how
Exactly.
to go there. Because even at the time when they started speaking about mental health close to 10 years ago, that was huge at the time. And that might be country to country, something that's actually quite
Yep.
normal and expected in other countries and other monarchies. And so I don't know which comes first. Is it that the Danish royals are more popular because they speak about it, or is it that they speak about it because they're more popular?
Yeah, that's
Hard
very
to know.
true. And I also feel like too, maybe it goes back to the bygone era. It seems like the Denmark royal family has let go of that. I mean, decades ago, while we see the British royal family is still very much trying to hold on to that bygone era, like you saw with the coronation, while trying to fit themselves as modern and not kind of realizing you can't have both. And I also think too, again, I don't know as much about the Denmark royal family, so I could be wrong here, but I also feel like the British royal family is so exclusively tied to the Tory party, which is the conservative political party in Britain, while the Denmark royal family doesn't seem tied to one political one political party like the British Royals are, because they mostly hire from the Tory party. It's very few far in between you see them hire from the Labour Party, where it feels like the Denmark aren't doing that. Like they're not pulling from a political party, which I feel like maybe helps them get such high approval ratings.
I think the political side to it is actually just a byproduct of a class system that exists in the
Very
UK. And
true.
so I don't think it's necessarily this idea of we are linked to the Tory party. I think it's the class system that has existed in the UK.
To
It's
be
almost a
Tory.
default that there would be a seen as a closer affiliation. I mean,
Yes.
they will never talk about politics. They will never say how they vote. They will never weigh in on referendums or votes or anything or elections. And there's been, a total mix. If you look across the board of the prime ministers that were in office during Queen Elizabeth's reign, it was a total mix, and
Yeah.
they all said they got on with her. But I think the perception and the idea that they are more linked to the Tories is not so much about politics,
Oh,
but about
yeah,
class.
that's very true, because it seems like, it seems like also like one of those jobs. I think in America, you talk a lot about nepotism and how nepotism can get you into certain fields. Like right now, fashion weeks are going on. So I think about that a lot, how they talk about you have to have money to be in fashion, especially to start off in fashion. And it kind of seems like because it doesn't pay well. And it's like with the British Royals, their staff isn't paid well. So it's like you have to have money to be able to work for the British Royals and then get that step up to put on your resume, oh, I worked for them. And then hopefully from there, you get a better job. And yeah, like you said, classism, that's usually going to be people that are coming from very upper class to the ristos working for you. And they all seem to, not all, but most seem to fall into the Tory party. Yeah, that's very interesting. That class system.
And it's not necessarily just money, it's
Mhm.
it's old money. And I think what is different, so for me personally, I'm Irish, but I lived in London for 7 years and I moved to the US this year. So it's been really interesting for me to see cultural differences and how that plays into conversations about news and current affairs. And I would say the biggest difference to me is the idea that in America you make
Yeah.
money and you have money. And in the UK, it's such a different thing. It's not just about your net worth, it's about your education, your background, possibly even like, does your family have titles? And so, if I won the lotto in the UK today, I still don't
That's so
qualify for those
interesting.
things. It's a class
Yes.
system more than it has been in
Yeah, because I
anywhere
think
else
about
in the
like say
world.
the Kennedys. That was such a fascination in say like the 90s and stuff like that. But 2024 and the Kennedys aren't a big deal, and that's old money. It's kind of like we let that go. We just know our nepotism babies. And nepotism babies, they can be, hey, my mom was an actress. And that's how we got our money. We don't really care about how far down the line it came, which I think too, and I have to ask you about Meghan Markle, because especially being Irish, living in London and stuff like that, how much do you think class worked against Meghan when she came into the scene versus say racism or xenophobia?
Can I just say really quickly, though, that the example you gave there of the Kennedys is such a perfect example because of how in America it's different, that one generation to the
Yes.
next can change. Because the Kennedy's father wasn't allowed, because he was Irish Catholic, wasn't allowed into a golf course somewhere in Boston. I'm going to find out the name, and that's why they got the house in Hyannis,
That's so
which became
funny.
so
Yes.
famous on
Because it's
Cape
like,
Cod.
yeah, like Americans, we can't be like, think we're too above that, because we definitely had that in the past. But yeah, like you said, it could change more generation from generation, because 2024, it's like, okay, Kennedy. I don't know. It's like Ariana Grande's better. I don't know. Like,
I just thought that was such an interesting example because being Irish, have just moving to Boston too, I'm so intrigued
oh,
by all of
yes.
that and the history of it. But sorry,
Oh
I've
no,
lost my
it's
train of
okay.
thought.
It's
I'm so
okay.
sorry.
I would, yeah, love to know your perspective of that because, like, I haven't really got to have someone on here and pick their brain. I think too, who were in London and in Britain during that time, and also have roots in Europe. I mean, being Irish, of just what what you saw when Megan came along, from the conversations going around you to what you were actually reading in the media. Because I'm sure it's a little bit different than, say, what I can read in British media coming from the US.
Honestly, there was a lot of excitement, and it was a kind of a breath of fresh air, and maybe that played into the class system that the general population was really excited about it. I think a lot of the media was very excited about it at the start, and
Yep.
I think there's a lot of evidence of that. And I think there was some atrocious articles published in tabloids that rightly have been,
Hmm.
highlighted. But I think there was a lot of excitement
Yes.
there as well. It wasn't just American. She was on a show a lot of people watched. Harry was the most popular royal at the time. Do I think there was a class issue? I think ultimately I would say I think it would be a huge struggle to not grow up in the world of aristocracy and immerse yourself in the royal family. And I think that would be a huge
Hmm.
challenge for anybody. In a different way, Kate Middleton and the Middleton family experienced a huge amount of classism when that relationship began. I think right up to the wedding, to be totally
Yes.
honest with you. And so it's just a different world. There's aristocracy in the UK, and then there's
That's so
most of
interesting
the
to you
public.
bringing up Kate, because for the Patreon deep dive, I did William and Kate's early years. So I went over a lot of old articles. And what I found so interesting about Kate is how her class was used against her, but then it was used as something positive, but then it was against her, then it was something positive. Because it felt like whenever they broke up, suddenly the classes articles were kind of spiking up a bit more. But then when they were together, it was suddenly like, oh, this is this is great. This is fresh air. We love this. The people love this. Because I think you really see that too, as it seemed like the people really did love Kate, and they loved the fact that she wasn't from the aristocrat setting. But the people writing these articles, even though they weren't aristocrats, felt like some need to hold up that standard. So you get these little digs against her, and it kind of feels like where you see the people and the people writing these articles, the difference of opinions there, and how maybe the general public isn't actually being represented properly and their feelings about that.
But you think about it. I mean, we've mentioned it already. If you compared it to American culture, had this been happening in America, it would have been the story of how her parents made a huge fortune when they didn't come from it, and the
Exactly.
entrepreneurial side, and what they've done and how they've used that money to educate their children, and they invested in their kids and they gave them everything. And
Hmm.
isn't that the dream? And then the reverse in the UK can be, ultimately it doesn't matter how much money you make, you
I
you
read an
didn't grow up
article
in
where
our world.
they were claiming, and I don't believe this, but they were claiming that, well, the queen, I don't believe the queen would make this dig. I don't know, maybe I still think she's more dignified than she actually was. But people were making digs at the Middletons because they had a paved driveway and not I think a stone one or a brick one instead. Like, that is just how bad it was for them. They decided to get their driveway paved. It really shows that they're new money. Like, I was just like, this is ridiculous. And they did have to wait years to finally get props for being self-made millionaires. Because I feel like now we see that when it comes to the Middletons, because they've won their way into people's hearts. But in the beginning, none of those, like you said, none of those things were good things. And it does seem like William's friends, they even say Harry at one point were making digs against her class. So I always think about, like, I can't imagine what Megan came into with that, and then being American and being biracial too, when she had to go to the country and do the whole shooting weekend and stuff like that, how that was for her, because that just seems just aristo. Oh, I want to say Aristo Hell because it would be for me. I feel like I would not want to be a part of that.
I think the nicest way I could describe it is just a culture within a culture.
A very posh culture.
you
That's
know
why too I always find it interesting when people will like note that Kate speaks differently now. And I'm like, of course she would kind of like just little things to edit her accent because it means everything when you think about the class system. You want to have a posher accent because if you just say a word in a certain way, it just shows where you are on the class system and who no one wants to be below their Risto. I remember at one point people picked up like, and I think Megan was like using, there was a slight like British accent suddenly coming from her. And I'm just like, yes, I'm like, she's probably so
Really?
desperate to fit in that she's doing it. And I don't blame her. I would probably pull a Madonna too, or a Dorrit from Beverly Hills Housewives and suddenly have an accent.
Well, I think if ever went back to Ireland with the British accent, I think my dad would tell me exactly where to go.
I I love the
Wouldn't be
Irish, I
there.
must say. When Queen Elizabeth II died, I shouldn't say this, but they provided a lot of entertainment on Twitter. like I could not get over them. I was like, I really need to look into the history here because I'm feeling anger. I'm feeling resentment.
Well, we should do a deep dive one day because I take a very fair approach to this and I've done a lot of writing on this before. And our history as two neighboring countries is very, very deeply complex. And the relationship with the royal family, plays a part in that. And it's been challenging, but I think actually the queen during her reign uh, brought a lot towards the end, made a visit to, I
Mhm.
don't want to get into too much now to bore you, but basically the idea that the queen was the longest reigning British monarch ever but only made one visit to the Republic of Ireland speaks to just how much conflict there was between both countries. She made a
Yes.
visit in 2011 and it was so hotly anticipated. And there was a lot of nerves on both sides from politicians about how it would go. It could not have gone better. It could not have gone
Yes.
better. And she was very warmly received. And, you have to remember that in 1979, Lord Mountbatten was murdered by the IRA off the coast of Ireland. And so for them personally, for their family, it has been challenging also. And
Yep.
when she came to Dublin Castle, she said, I want to paraphrase here, but she said, you can bow to the past without being bound by it. And I think the visit was very well received, and that was always very interesting to me. And I think also if you look at politics in Northern Ireland at the moment, Sinn Féin, a Republican Party who want to united Ireland, were very professional, I thought, in their statements following her death. And it was very respectful to the British people on the island of Ireland. And so I'd love to get into that with you one day because I think there's so many interesting dynamics there. But
I would
yeah,
love to.
anytime.
Because I think that's too. I always think these histories are so important to even knowing why royals are going to these countries. Like, why are they visiting Ireland? Why are they visiting Scotland? Because there's history there. There is a movement to maybe get rid of the British royal family, or just there's tension between this country's government and the British government, to things like that. I feel like people, it's like these, they don't pop in for these visits just for fun. There's always a political reason. There's always
Yeah.
a history there of why they have to be going there and why they have to be seen smiling and being with the people and supporting local organizations too. Which I think why we'll see William and Kate going to Ireland and going to Scotland, especially right now, a lot more.
When I was a producer at CNN, we did a tour before Meghan and Harry's wedding in 2018. We did a trip to Belfast, and it's one of the few places that when the royal family go, it's really just not announced until they're there. And so we
Oh.
arrived over the night before, and it's really under a very, very strict embargo when they go to Northern Ireland, and it speaks to the sensitivities of the relationship. The
Hmm.
visit went really well, but at the same time, it's not announced too far in advance, and there was heavy security. Let me tell you.
That's very interesting. And then I think about that. I'm like, of course they sit the shiny new couple. You know what I mean? Because this is a shiny new couple. Everyone's excited about them. Drum up, interest, drum up support for us.
It was part of a British tour in the months before the wedding that they kind of
Yes.
just toured the whole of the UK, I guess.
Thank you so much for this. That would thank you. And we really do need to do an Ireland deep dive because I don't know, there's just so much to talk about there and I can really get going when it comes to the British government and the British royal family and how they have just done heinous things to other countries and how interesting it is to see them now in modern times try to make up for that without really ever directly talking about it. And why we have these tours. Because again, I think people forget the reason why they call it a charm tour is because they're trying to charm people to forget about something, usually, to pretend like that didn't happen or they're not a part of it.
Well, how about I propose this to you? Why don't we do one for Paddy's Day this year?
Oh, yes, I will. I might actually drink some beer for that.
What perfect timing. I'll get my Guinness, we'll get green tops on, and we'll talk about it. Let's,
Yes, that would be perfect. And you're in Boston. I know you're going to be feeling Irish pride, okay?
I know I might be drunk, but we'll see.
Even better, even better. I feel like Margaret would be proud of us.
I'm not going to smoke a cigarette for her, but I will keep
I know.
it.
Exactly. I won't either, but I'll pretend for her. I'll feel fabulous, like she looks fabulous when she's just smoking and painting away. We do not promote smoking cigarettes on Lady Audaci-Tea, just Margaret being fabulous. Thank you so much for coming on and letting me pick your brain and just giving us all of this history too. Thank you so, so much. It was an absolute joy.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really enjoyed it.
And please tell the people, I know you also have a Substack, right? Or a Patreon?
Patreon, yes, yeah. But
Yes, let the people know where they can find you.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, my presence is mostly on Instagram. It's News by Hill. And basically, what I model myself as is a personal stylist on news. So I don't claim to do the journalism, I don't claim to put it all together, but I summarize it for you. I go through everything and I'll say to you, here are your staples. This is what you need to know, and this is what's trending. And so
Yes.
I do that all the time. And I kind of cover everything from politics, geopolitics, royalty,
Mhm.
whatever's going on, we're covering it.
Yes, and I know because we talked about this a couple times on the podcast, especially people who are interested in keeping up with what's going on with Israel and Palestine. You have been an amazing follow for that. So thank you so much for that, you guys. A great follow if you want to keep up on that information too. And you'll get your royal news along with that. So you get
Thank
it
you.
all. And especially with the upcoming elections, you guys follow her. Yes, yes, yes.
Here. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. Oh, no, of course. Thank you. And you guys remember, pinkies up.